Yn enw yw Ieuan Rees o Melin Cwm Llwchwr ar ochr yr Afon Aman. Rwy'n briod gyda Margaret ac yn y dwy ferch, Victoria yng Ngharad, a rwy wedi bod yn ei gwaith llythrynnu dros hanner canrif. It's very hard to remember my very first headstone. That's all I can remember. It was for an English family living in London from Welsh descent. And how they came to know about it, I don't know, it's too long ago. I do remember that the name was Harris, and I can't even remember where it went, nothing. That's all I remember. It was done in Roman letters to the best of my ability. I do remember they were thrilled with it and they were happy with it. Of course they did. They didn't know any different. I suppose I'm a very lucky person, because unlike most people, I seem to know what I wanted to do from a very early age. Not specifically, but I knew I wanted to do something with letters. Now, why is very hard to know. Perhaps it could have been the fact that my mother wrote poetry and wrote a few tiny books, and so I was inundated and surrounded by books all my life. But perhaps the first possible introduction to lettering was when I was very young and went to the Methodist chapel, and my mother, because of her love of books, took it upon herself to look after the hymn books and got my brother and myself to wrap every single one of them in brown craft paper. And it was my job to write in Welsh hymn books, Llyfr Emynau, which I did with a fountain pen with red ink and copying the type of what was then the miners' paper, the Daily Herald, which of course today is the Sun. The only difference being is that instead of having beautiful ladies on page 3, there were pictures of miners. Other than that, it's very much the same. But perhaps I could give credit to my Latin teacher in the grammar school, because he gave my Latin homework back one day. And he said, "Are you interested in art, Ieuan?" And I said, "Yes." "How did you know?" And he said, which is very astute of him, I thought, "I could see from your handwriting. It's beautiful, but totally illegible. I can't read it. Do something about it." I sort of was drawing all the time, everything. I never copied things out of books or magazines. I always outside, sitting in hedges, drawing birds and flowers, buildings, all my friends in the snooker place. I was drawing all the time. And I was happy drawing. But I was told that art would be a waste of time, that they felt that I had an analytical mind, that how they knew at that early age I don't know, and they felt that going into art was destroying and not making full use of that. But I totally refused to listen and said that I would do art at all costs. And I was told, "Well, don't come back and tell me in years to come when you're starving in your garret because you have failed as an artist, because we had warned you." So I listened to the Latin teacher. And I said, "Well, he's right. What do I do? How do I make my handwriting more legible?" And then I started thinking, how do I relate all the letters in an alphabet to make sure they belong to the same family? Because that's what an alphabet is after all. A mother, which is the O, and the father, which is the I. They just are enjoying themselves in bed, enough to have 24 kids, and then they must have some resemblance, right? But the important thing is to realize that not every brother and sister look exactly the same. They're not all twins, right? But there will be family resemblance there somewhere, right? And I think the whole beauty of lettering is to make every member of the family, in other words, every letter in the alphabet, they must be individuals, but they must also appear to be from the same family, and that's a challenge. But I had to teach lettering myself, because there's nobody there who taught lettering. So I did it purely by my own observation, looking at type on newspapers and so forth. And I love playing with the broad-edged pen. I just love the shapes of the strokes and the feel of them. And to have an art school which specialized in calligraphy was a dream come true. And I have to admit that the 3 years I spent at Camberwell School of Art, I think are probably the 3 happiest years of my life. So when I left the Royal College of Art, I was very fortunate in the sense that I started having commissions even when I was a student. So on the day I left, I had commissions to go on to. And I've never, cross fingers, to this day, ever been out of work. And the reason for that is hard to know why. I'd like to think I deserve it because I worked extremely hard. I have had every difficulty that any artist could have in front of me, but I've succumbed them all. Because my great belief is that although I have a tremendous amount of patience, because my work, you need patience with your work, but you also need patience dealing with people. And my work is involved with people all the time, so I have to be very, very patient. And the problems of the work needs that patience. But more importantly, although patience is extremely important, there is something much more important, and that is sticking power. Because things will go wrong, whether we like it or not, is part of life. So we've got to accept the fact that to get success, we've got to deal with the problems. And I think it's as simple as that, is when you have problems, you've got to deal with them, stick it out, and get through it, and just carry on. It's incredible. I've done so many headstones for so many people, right? Elder people, stillborn babies, you name it, I've tried my best to do the best with all of them. And they're all got their challenges, and some is easier than others, but still that's a challenge. But I have to admit the hardest headstone I ever had to do was for my own wife. Because I knew too much about her. And being able to do something which was the last thing I could do for her, that was right for her. I didn't do it for about 7 years. I just couldn't figure out what to do. There's no doubt about it, because the closer you are to people, the harder it is to get it right. And so, that's why, the more information I get with people, it helps, of course. But sometimes, with something personal, you just can't resolve it sometimes. I tried to think only from her point of view. What did she love? What didn't she like? What was her opinions? She was not interested in drawing anything that was alive. She only drew dead things, or dead words, empty buildings, graveyards, anything that wasn't alive, and she loved it. And her reason was quite interesting. She said, why should I draw something that's alive? It's got life. I can't do anything for it. Right? I draw something that's gone, then I can bring it back to life. It was a very interesting thing. She loved thorns and things. And she liked things when they were just wilting. And in a way, it became very easy in the end. She got so involved with these natural things that I tried to make her name part of nature. So her name became, there was thorns sticking out of her letters in her name, so that it was part of the whole surroundings. It wasn't just her name. The whole thing was like an unkept garden, if you wish, because she didn't like cultivated gardens. So her headstone did look like something in the wild. And everything was intertwined. And because she didn't like things to be isolated, she felt everything belonged together. So I based it on that. My first wife, Barbara, died in 1988 at the very early age of 44. And I had to look after 2 little girls on my own for nearly 7 years or more. And Angharad, my youngest, was only 6 years old when her mother died. And Victoria, her sister, of course, was 13. So I had to look after them on my own for all those 7 years and had to do my work. So I had to learn to be very disciplined, because the amount of hours I had to work in the day was very limited by being a mother and a father and a cook and washing and ironing and everything else. And I learned in that period to be tough on people for the very first time, because I've always been a very soft idiot, don't like to say no to people. But because my time was so limited, and I only average about 4 hours sleep a night because of being a mother and father and having to work. But the interesting thing is that because calligraphy needs total concentration, once you start writing, you've got to keep the flow going from beginning to end. And if you get disrupted, then the pattern and the flow of the work gets totally ruined. But I didn't have that concentrated time, to do it, because once I started, then I may have to just go and pick them up from school or do something else. So the ability to do calligraphy totally went. It was in my heart, it was in my head, but my hands could not do it. The messages couldn't get through, purely because I couldn't get the concentrated time it needed. But fortunately, carving, which was only about 20% of the work that I did, was much easier to deal with, because I could stop and start with the design and the tracing and the carving without it affecting the flow too much. It did affect it, but not in a very serious way as it did with calligraphy. So my whole role changed from being a calligrapher to a letter carver, pure because of how life, But then, as I said earlier, these things happen in life. You just got to grin and bear it and get on with it. I couldn't afford to feel sorry for myself because I had the children to look after. Now, what's interesting is that if you look around here, there's quite a lot of slate. And there was a time when I first started off, it was very difficult because people wanted something in a hurry. Okay, and I didn't have the slate. And so I had to say to them, you'll have to wait a couple of months for me to get the slate. Then I took a huge gamble years ago, huge gamble. And I took a huge overdraft. And I bought myself about 6,000 to 7,000 worth of slate. Didn't know whether I'd have the work. It was a gamble. And I've kept that going to this day. I never allow myself to be out of stock. So the slate comes in, not ready to carve. When I get them to here, I take my little forklift there. And without that forklift, I would be in trouble, because we can get things from outside here, up the ramp, which I had to build, up to the room there where I see the polishers and the polisher and the saw, where I do the rest of the work. People always feel happy with the work that I do, I'm glad to say, because everything comes out in pristine condition, very clean, scratch-free. But my God, if they saw the process, they would be terrified. Here's a filthy job in every kind of the way. Everything is Heath Robinson here because I had to everything off an overdraft. So I bought this thing for £200, an old stone cutter. It had this railings on it and nothing else, because you had to pull it by this little thing here. But a friend and myself, we went to scrap yards and bought lots of little things, and the only thing that I ever bought that was new was the chain. So we made all this up from bits of tractor and bits of everything, and this absolutely works like a dream. Now the headstone is placed there. It takes a lot of manoeuvring and shoving and pushing to get it in the right position to cut. And I use this little gadget here, which I put against that, if you can see it, and that will tie up with a line that I will have had on my headstone, so I'll make sure it's in line with those. And then I saw. Now when you do a headstone or an oval plaque or anything that's got a roundish top, it's hard work, because you can't cut curves with this, as you can imagine. So what you do, you cut around the semicircle line lots of straight lines, like a 50p coin if you wish, and then you keep on cutting the corners off until you have it like a rough circle with lots of tiny little lines on it. And then use these grinders then to grind it off and smooth it all off, and then finish off by hand with diamond pads and what have you. It's a long process. An average headstone with a semicircular top takes about 2.5 to 3 hours to prepare before we can do anything else. But it's worth it at the end. But this particular one is even more difficult, because not only is it going around like a pebble shape, but it's actually curved this way as well. And that is a very, very slow, tedious job. And it gets into the realm of sculpture then. You see, because we really have to go round and round and round all this until, but it's worth it, because the feeling of that, because there's no sharp edges on it, is so sensual. It makes you want to touch it. And it's very, very therapeutic. Now the reason it might make you feel squeezy, you see me doing that. Can I do that now? It doesn't slide, right? Which means the corners are sharp. And it doesn't matter how sharp it is in the middle, although that's very important. If the corners are not sharp, they'll slide everywhere. The minute you get onto the slate, it will slide rather than get into the slate. Now some people ask me, what happens when you make mistakes? Of course I make mistakes, and the reason I make mistakes is because I'm human. I'm glad I'm human, otherwise it would be boring if I didn't make any mistakes at all. And mistakes are very good things, because it teaches you so much. I think there's a saying, or somebody once said, everybody makes a mistake, and some people make it twice. That's fine. If you make it 3 times, then there's something's wrong. And so if I do make a mistake, I don't panic, because what can you do if you panic? Just make things worse. I taught Margaret when she was a student of mine, just for one evening a week, for a couple of terms at Campbell School of Art. Years and years and years and years later, I bumped into her again in a place called Carmarthen, and we had a cup of tea together. There was no thinking of getting together or anything like that, and then we bumped into each other again in the same town, but in a different place. And so when I realized that Margaret was going to move to another place with her children, and I wasn't very happy with the sound of the place she was going to, I asked her if she'd be interested in coming here and she could help me with the children, and I would be able to give her a place for nothing, so she'd have to pay any rent. And so that's how it came about, and time did the rest. Another thing that I've been asked is whether or not I would design my own headstone. I have thought about it. In a way, I'm a hypocrite in saying what I'm going to say, because what matters in the end is what we do when we are alive. And if we do a good job, that will carry on in people's memories or whatever. So I don't care a damn whether I have a headstone or not. And then I say to myself, well, I won't want somebody else carving my name, I'll do my own. Are you with me? So I don't really know. I don't particularly care. But, Ieuan Rees, Master Scribe or whatever it is, does it matter? It's what I've done in life that matters, not what people think about it afterwards. So I don't know. If my kids want to do something that I won't know about it, so I'll leave it to them. Over the years, many people have asked me, what I think about the future in terms of afterlife and all the rest of it. And I sometimes think that up there in the heavens, that there is a massive circular thing up there in the form of a honeycomb. So my little soul is sent down to earth and it experiences during the day. And then when I'm asleep, the soul leaves the body and goes and feeds this massive globe in the sky. And I think everybody has a little place up there that they deposit their daily intake of honey or whatever it is, pollen. And I think when we die, that soul, where is it going to go? It probably find somewhere else to go. Perhaps in a newborn baby somewhere else. Might be in an animal, might be in a flower, I don't know. But I think it will continue in one form or another, the soul. I don't particularly wish to know. I think that we are all here to feed that global thing in one form or another.